The South African and African creative realm has come into its own over the past few decades, to the point that the whole world is watching, looking to Africa for inspiration, answers and guidance. For this week's episode, we're coming to you from the spectacular Aurum restaurant that can be found in the Leonardo building in Sandton, to explore the creative world of design, interior as well as architecture. We speak to the visionaries and thought leaders that are at the forefront of African creativity. I'm your host, Ayanda Tabete, and this is Africa Modern. Coming up on Africa Modern this week, we're exploring local design with Sifiso Shange from AfriModern.
Design to me it's the solution of a lot of the problems that we have on Earth.
And then we take a look at African-inspired interior design with Mpho Vackier from The Urban Native.
A lot of people are waking up to the fact that Africa is just magic.
And to finish things off, we're catching up with creatives by chatting to Nigerian Architect Hassan Anifowose.
Do the work.
To kick off today's show, we caught up with local furniture designer Sifiso Shange, who creates unique and modern furniture pieces under the label AfriModern. He prides himself on the preservation of authentic African stories, particularly those that pertain to his own culture. Let's check him out.
Design to me it's the solution of a lot of the problems that we have on Earth. I say that because, you know, when I started AfriModern, I saw that I was losing a lot of myself in terms of seeking to understand my culture. I said to myself, if there's one thing I'm really good at, it's design. And if I can use that to rebuild myself and find my culture and get to know more, then I'm obviously doing something right with design. Realize how important it is, not only in terms of, you know, helping myself, but it's got this power to solve a lot of problems that we have in the world in the most beautiful way too. So I was like, how do I tell these stories and keep them forever? And I realized that I had such a strong passion for furniture, and I was like, yo, I'm gonna find a way to celebrate, you know, modern furniture because I love Scandinavian design, but then put myself into it and put a lot of like this bold African touch into it. And while that was happening, things would happen at home culturally, and I would find a way to tell these stories through the furniture. And that made me who I am today, because everything that I do is an extension of my work, and it represents me. It represents the celebration of Sifiso celebrating Western and modern culture, but also being this proud Zulu man that's just so proud of himself and his culture and his people, and, you know, seeing us at our highest form. The design process is quite, it's different for every project or every story. Like, let me make an example with the one behind us here, the server unit. So Tessa Proudfoot's associates called me and she said, hey, we are working on the server, this house. The couple loves love and they love African art. I was like, okay, great. And I had the story that I did back in 2014, was called Utando. A friend of mine who was getting married, and him and his partner had been in this beautiful relationship that had a lot of ups and downs, them losing their kid and still being together and holding it down. And I just loved how honest their love was. And the reason I say that was then I took elements of their love in terms of what love meant to them, and then I formulated these patterns that, you know, love is a journey and it has no start, it has no end when you're together. And that's why you have that line that's within the server. So the shapes are a big part of it from a cultural view. Historically, the triangles, the circles, and the Zulu beadwork geometry, I've taken a lot of inspiration from that. And I had to respect it because within Zulu culture, men are not allowed to do beadwork. So I had to find a way to honor it and respect it and take all of those elements, and that's why it's in the furniture, so that it's there and people are used to the motifs and people understand the motifs and what the motifs mean. So like love is a journey, and then what I did was I used geometric patterns from beadwork that represent the male and the female, putting the male on top to guide and protect her, and she's at the bottom because she's the root of the relationship. So there's these stories that I formulate, you know, using the geometry. And when Tessa called me about the project, I said, I have an amazing project I think will, you know, story will fit for the house. Really, the process is different, you know, it depends on the story, what the story represents. Like this month, I am working on stories inspired by women. And women have always been a big part of my life. I was raised by my grandmother and aunt, so a lot of these stories focus on their strength, their love, you know, the messages they shared with me, the stories they shared with me, and I take that and I turn it into patterns that then, you know, visually express that narrative that I'm trying to tell. So it's really haphazard in how it happens, but, you know, I try and pull it together so that when you see it with anything else that I do, it makes sense. You know, triangles are very part of what I do because they represent our start, our middle, our end. Lines are very important because they represent our journeys. Circles are very important because they represent the whole spirit of centrality. So I believe that we should all listen to each other, and that's part of the value of respect. So it's those elements that are within the story. So materials, there's two options of doing it. I have the natural form where it's your woods, your natural products, and then we have, you know, the Duco, and I'm also exploring greener materials because also within how AfriModern works, so the brand ethos is, I don't want you to come and buy another server again. It's about having this one server and then you protect it and love it because you're storing your more special goods in there. Reason being is because I understand that too much of everything is not good for the earth. So I try and make sure that we are cognitive of the materials we use. I try and make sure that at the factory we try and get the greenest paint. We try and find the best possible solution to create the product. So it's either we go the Duco route when we make the stuff or we go the natural route. And I've always felt like, you know, shapes, color, finishes, and all of these things that come together in this piece of furniture really represent, you know, the human experience in its most honest form. It represents how all of us are different, and yet we come together to create this beautiful thing called life, you know? And that's really how I try and see the work, you know, because I think of AfriModern. AfriModern in its most honest form is modern being the Scandinavian modern way of looking at things, and African being the shapes, the forms, and spirituality coming together to create this one lifestyle and way of thinking. I think I am here, sitting here on this chair today. It's because of everyone that's believed in my journey and believed in my stories. And you know, so that when you look back with everything that you've did in your amazing career as a designer or whatever you may be, you can honestly say that you contributed positively to the human race. And that's really what I want to do, to sit back maybe when I'm 75, if I get to 75, and I look back and say, I did my very best in being a good human being, and I contributed positively. And I'd say if we could all aspire to that, it'd be amazing, you know?
Don't go anywhere, because after the break, we'll be taking a look at African-inspired interior and product design with Mpho Vackier of The Urban Native. Welcome back to Africa Modern. For Mpho Vackier, history and honoring one's culture is of utmost importance when it comes to her furniture designs. Africa inspires her, from the graphic artworks of the Ndebele culture and the meaning behind the shapes and colors to the traditional African hairstyles. Let's check her out.
My name is Mpho Vackier. I am a furniture designer and product designer. I'm also the creative director of The Urban Native, a furniture and product design studio based in Johannesburg. The Urban Native is a contemporary furniture design studio, but we do more than that. We tell stories through furniture. We tell African stories through furniture. Most of our furniture is inspired by African stories and heritage and culture. And I think more than anything, we endeavor to tell stories of African culture so that they're not forgotten. And for me personally, with my son being both Belgian and South African, it's very important for me to know that he belongs to kings and queens and magicians, you know. So I tell specifically these stories for him so that he can go overseas and he's proud and he knows who he is and he knows who his people are. A lot of cultures really get lost because nothing is written down. And with what we do here at the Urban Native, we're really just trying to preserve what we can, the way that we can, by telling the stories that we do through our pieces. Our recent collection, our hair collection, our African crowns collection, is inspired by traditionally African hairstyles from the very top of Africa, from the very top of the continent to South Africa, to like Zulu women in the 1930s, the 1940s. The things that we took from those traditional hairstyles, the textures that we took, and we translated that into products through weaving, you know, or using fringe, or so all of those aspects of the inspiration, texture, color, form, you know, all of those things, we took those things and then we said, okay, great, but if you really wanted to design a chair that was relevant and relatable to the modern client, these are the things that you would need. And it's a constant balance because I'm always changing the piece of furniture, but it's like this constant thing of you trying to make these two things come together and collaborate and make things that are relatable, but still look like, oh my gosh, this looks so cool, I would have never thought about it. I think what sets our work apart is who's telling the story. Because I am me, and everything that I am and I have learned is infused in my work, you know? I'm a mother, but I'm also like super practical. So when I design, it's like, okay, it looks great, but it's functional, you know, like, because we're not trying to design things that are just pretty. But I think what also infuses into the work that we do is the inspiration, you know, what inspires us and how we then take those inspiration and relay them into functional pieces that have an aesthetic of their own and I guess a language that's distinctly the Urban Native. So we constantly also walking the line between like technology and like new materials, but using them in old ways. Our Nasara screen, the very first one, had telephone wire that was weaved to look like traditional basketry, you know. So I'm constantly always exploring like, okay, so I don't have this or I don't have access to this, what can we use that we have now in order to make what we want to achieve? And I think that's maybe what is so different about what African creatives do, you know. They have what they have and they work with that, but they really explore and they push it. What I would like to see moving forward in the future, in the space, is more collaboration. Personally, as a brand, I'd like to be able to collaborate more with brands within the continent. I mean, of course, I'd like to collaborate with international brands, but I think there are certain things and nuances that me as a South African could never understand about designers in another country in Africa. And I think there's so much to learn from that, and they're just next door, right? So maybe before we go over the sea. Maybe we just go over the border. I think people in Africa have always been creating, you know, and I think we've always just been doing what we do. I mean, if you look at that, just the history of basketry in Africa, that alone, it's art. I mean, there are amazing craftspeople who've just been doing what they do. But I also think that the fact that we're taking ownership of our stories, and we like saying, wait, hold on, we're not that, this is who we are, let me tell you a bit about who we are. Maybe we're also taking part in engaging more in the conversation of defining ourselves. So I think that's what's happening. And the fact that now we have social media, which means that we can engage with people overseas who have never even visited Africa, right? But now they can start getting a sense of, oh, is this what the design scene is like in South Africa or Ghana or Dakar, right? And they start getting the truth because it's coming from our mouths, and we as the people living here telling those stories, we are directing those stories, and we are in charge of those stories, and we're telling those truths. And a lot of people are waking up to the fact that Africa is just magic. And that's it.
Don't go anywhere, because after the break, we'll be catching up with top Nigerian architect Hassan Anifowose. You don't want to miss it. For this week's episode of Africa Modern, we're coming to you from the spectacular Aurum restaurant found in the Leonardo building in Sandton. Aurum is hands down my favorite restaurant. The architecture and interior decor of this magnificent location is what really takes my breath away, and the food is simply out of this world. It's a gastronomic culinary experience that focuses on a modern interpretation of European cuisine. A new gold standard for the quality-starved, it creates a culinary playground of nostalgic dishes that aims to engage diners on an emotional level. Located in the heart of Sandton inside the Leonardo, Aurum, translated to gold, exists as a timeless, unique culinary experience beyond that of simply dining. The Leonardo itself is one such marvel, as Africa's tallest building, an iconic high-rise residential and retail complex in the heart of Joburg's financial district in Sandton. Standing at an astonishing 229 meters, the skyscraper is heads above the rest. Located within walking distance of the JSE, the headquarters of some of Africa's biggest companies, and Sandton City, a premier shopping mall, a visit to Aurum and the Leonardo is definitely a must. Each week, we feature a segment titled Catching Up with Creatives. This is a platform to showcase established as well as up-and-coming creative talent. We receive content that has been filmed remotely by them in their own studios. We ask them a couple of questions just to get a glimpse into their lives. On this week's feature of Catching Up with Creatives, we caught up with Hassan Anifowose, who is the co-founder of Chrono Studios that is based in Lagos, Nigeria. He is passionate about 3D visualization and enhancing the design and architectural experience. His focus lies in solving the shortage of real estate in the cities of Nigeria. Let's find out more.
Okay, recording. My name is Hassan. I'm an architect and co-founder at Chrono Studios, and I'm also part of other ventures that are trying to use technology to improve the ecosystem of the design and construction industry. Really, it's been long coming because I think I was about 14 years old then, and I always watched my dad's friend, who was the architect that designed our home. He was always, working on the details, and he was always really eager to show me how things worked, and that was basically my first interest in architecture. Mostly nature. I'm an avid lover of nature. When I go on a walk, when I go cycling, I see trees, I see animals. I'm always fascinated by everything around me. I'm very simplistic. I want like a bare wall and just a small feature wall. So I'm more on the simplistic approach side, and I love it really simple with just a spatter of just a little bit of accent or feature that actually draws attention to itself. African modern to me sounds like a movement. Sounds like a movement of creatives, a movement of creatives with rich African content. We're pushing our Africanness, into modernity. We're developing stuff, not old stuff, but new stuff from Africa, and we're getting all that, tons of brilliant ideas and inspiration into contemporary settings. The best advice I've been given is 3 words: do the work. So my advice for young and upcoming architects is not to shy away from doing the work. Sometimes it tends to be a ton of responsibilities to get the right thing done at the right time, the right pace and stuff, but I would tell them, if you do the work, everything else will follow. So part of the challenges that I face as an African creative, especially on the international setting, is people not thinking that I'm capable of doing something. That guy is a black guy, right? Is he really capable of leading this team? Yeah, so a lot of times I'm faced with those kind of, sometimes not really spoken, but insinuated kind of, thoughts that people think, are you really able to deliver on this product or this process? So what I'm currently working on that people can expect, I'm gonna say I'm a serial entrepreneur, and it's really hard to sit still in one place. I'm always doing something, and I'm always building something new or fixing something old. And we're currently working on a partnership with one of the big brands to take over Africa. Yeah, that's interesting. So that's something you should look out for. I'll say, huge thank you to everyone that's watching this. I'll catch you around again. So thank you. Bye.
It's been fun taking you through the first season as we explore the creatives that call Africa home. Remember, it doesn't end here, so please do join the conversation on our socials using the hashtag AfricaModern. Until next season, I'm your host, Ayanda Tabete, and this is Africa Modern.